Millionaire CEO divorced wife a day after she saved his life. Months later she found out the reason. It was 11:47 p.m. when Jada found him. She'd been looking forward to this moment all day, coming home after an 18-hour surgery. Kieran's office was empty, laptop still glowing with unfinished work on the Singapore expansion. The sound of running water led her to the guest bathroom, where she found him collapsed against the marble vanity. Kieran. His face was gray, slick with sweat. His breathing came in desperate gasps. Can't breathe. Dr. Jada Baptiste took over. Pulse check weak, irregular, racing. Lips tinged blue. Classic signs of cardiac arrest. This is Dr. Jada Baptiste. I need an ambulance at 432 Fifth Avenue, penthouse level. 34-year-old male, possible MI with severe arrhythmia. She grabbed aspirin from the medicine cabinet. Kieran, chew this. Stay with me, baby. Then his pulse disappeared. No, no, no. She pulled him to the floor, positioned her hands on his chest and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. Come on, Kieran. Don't you dare leave me. She performed CPR hundreds of times, but never with her own heart breaking with each press. Never knowing that if she failed, she'd lose not just her husband, but the father of the child he didn't know existed. After 4 minutes that felt like hours, his pulse returned. Weak but steady. The paramedics arrived to find him conscious, reaching for her hand. Jada, love you. I love you too. I'll meet you at the hospital. Welcome back, Golden family. If you're new here, you've just stepped into a story that will take you on an emotional roller coaster you'll never forget. To my incredible subscribers, thank you for being part of this journey. Your support fuels every story I tell. Let's get back to the story. Dr. Mike Webb, the attending cardiologist, was someone Jada knew from her residency days. Brilliant, thorough, and refreshingly direct. Marcus had been a year ahead of her in the program, and she remembered him as someone who never sugar-coated bad news but also never gave up on a patient. When he emerged from Kieran's room after several hours of tests and treatment, she immediately stood, her heart pounding in her throat. How is he? Mike looked tired, his scrubs rumpled from a long shift, but his expression was cautiously optimistic. Stable. The episode was triggered by severe stress and dehydration, but his heart responded well to treatment. We ran a full cardiac workup, EKG, echocardiogram, blood work. His heart muscle looks good, no signs of permanent damage. Relief flooded through her like warm water. So it wasn't a heart attack? Stress-induced cardiomyopathy. His heart literally stopped functioning properly due to extreme stress and physical exhaustion. It's more common than you'd think, especially in high-pressure professionals who don't take care of themselves. But he's okay? He's going to be okay. We'll want to keep him overnight for observation, monitor his rhythm, make sure there are no complications. But I expect a full recovery. Mike placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Jada, you saved his life. If you hadn't been there, if you hadn't performed CPR when you did. He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew how quickly cardiac arrest could turn fatal. Can I see him? He's sleeping, but yes. Room 314. Try not to wake him, his body needs rest. Kieran looked impossibly peaceful against the white hospital sheets, his dark hair tousled. His face finally relaxed in a way it hadn't been in weeks. The heart monitor beside his bed beeped steadily, a sound that was more beautiful than any music to Jada's ears. She settled into the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside his bed and took his hand, marveling at how warm his fingers felt now. His hands were one of the first things she had noticed about him at that charity gala 3 years ago. Strong, expressive hands that moved when he talked, hands that had built a company from nothing, hands that touched her with infinite gentleness. Now those hands lay still, and 4 lines snaking from the back of his left hand, but they were warm and alive in hers. Tomorrow, she thought, her free hand drifting unconsciously to her stomach. Tomorrow I'll tell him about the baby. Tomorrow we'll start planning our future. Tomorrow we'll talk about slowing down, about what really matters, about building a life that includes more than just work and ambition. The near-death experience would be a wake-up call, she was sure of it. Kieran would realize that all the success in the world meant nothing if he wasn't alive to enjoy it. She dozed fitfully in the chair, waking every few minutes to check the monitor, to make sure he was still breathing steadily. Hospital chairs were notoriously uncomfortable, but she wouldn't have left his side for anything. What if something happened? What if his heart stopped again and she wasn't there? Sometime during the night, exhaustion finally claimed her completely. She fell asleep with her head on his bed, their fingers intertwined, dreaming of a future where they were both healthy and happy and holding their baby together. She woke to Kieran stroking her hair. gentle fingers combing through the tangled strands, the same way he had done on countless lazy Sunday mornings when they had nowhere to be but with each other. "Hey beautiful," he whispered, his voice rough but stronger than the night before. "Hey yourself." She sat up, joints protesting from the awkward position. Her neck had a crick in it, and her back ached from sleeping curved over the hospital bed, but seeing him awake and alert made every discomfort worth it. "How are you feeling?" "Much better. Dr. Webb says I can go home this afternoon." He smiled, and it was the same warm smile that had made her fall in love with him. Not the polite smile he used in business meetings or the tired smile he gave when he was overwhelmed, but the real smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners. "Thank you for saving my life. Thank you for not dying on me." She squeezed his hand, feeling the steady pulse in his wrist that proved he was really okay. "We need to talk about your stress levels, though. What happened last night can't happen again." "Agreed. Maybe it's time I hired that COO you've been suggesting." It was exactly what she had hoped to hear. "Maybe it is." She studied his face, looking for any signs of lingering distress, but he seemed genuinely himself again, tired but alert, loving but focused. The color had returned to his cheeks and his breathing was deep and even. The man who had collapsed in their bathroom seemed like a distant nightmare. "I was thinking when we get home." "Mr. Ashworth?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, interrupting what would have been the perfect moment to share her news. "Dr. Webb would like to see you before discharge. Just some routine follow-up." "Of course." Kieran squeezed Jada's hand. "Why don't you go home and get some real rest? I'll take a cab when they release me." "Are you sure?" "Positive. You've been here all night. Go sleep in our actual bed." He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "I'll be home before dinner. We can order from that Thai place you love and have a proper conversation about everything." She kissed his forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of his skin mixed with the antiseptic smell of the hospital. "I'll see you at home." "And Kieran? We really do need to have that conversation about slowing down." "I know. We will. I promise." She left the hospital feeling lighter than she had in days. The morning sun was bright and warm, New York was bustling with its usual energy, and her husband was alive and healthy and coming home. Tonight she would share the news that would give Kieran a whole new reason to take better care of himself. The future stretched out before them, bright and full of possibility. They would hire a COO, maybe even a whole management team. Kieran could step back from the day-to-day operations and focus on the big picture, the vision stuff he was truly passionate about. They would buy a house in the suburbs, somewhere with a yard for children to play. They would travel together, take real vacations instead of business trips disguised as getaways. She spent the day in a kind of blissful haze, already planning how she would tell him. Maybe she would cook his favorite meal, set the table with candles, make it romantic and special. Or maybe she would keep it simple, just wake up with him the next morning and share the test results over coffee. Either way, it would be perfect because they would be together and they would be starting a family and everything would finally fall into place. That evening, Kieran came home as promised, looking more like himself than he had in weeks. They ordered Thai food and ate it curled up on the couch, talking about everything except the thing that mattered most. He seemed different somehow, more present, more focused on her instead of on work. The near-death experience had clearly shaken him, made him realize what truly mattered. "I love you," he said suddenly, in the middle of a conversation about whether they should repaint the guest bedroom. "I love you too," she replied, surprised by the intensity in his voice. "I know I've been distracted lately, working too much, not paying enough attention to us. But last night, when I thought I might lose you, might lose this." He gestured around their beautiful home at the life they had built together. "I realized nothing else matters. The company, the deals, the expansion. None of it means anything if I don't have you." It was exactly what she needed to hear, exactly the confirmation that they were on the right track. Tomorrow would be perfect. Tomorrow would change everything. She fell asleep that night with Kieran's arms around her, listening to his steady heartbeat, planning the words she would use to tell him they were going to be parents. She had never been happier, never more certain that their life was exactly as it should be. The next morning, Jada woke up alone. She had expected to find Kieran beside her. He had come home late the night before, claimed he was exhausted, and had been asleep by the time she had gotten out of her bath. Now she could hear him moving around downstairs, the sound of papers rustling, coffee brewing, the normal sounds of a morning routine. Perfect timing. Today was the day. Today she would finally share the news that would transform their marriage into a family. She imagines Kieran's reaction. Would he cry? Would he laugh? Would he pick her up and spin her around the way he had when she got the job at Mount Sinai? Would he immediately start planning nurseries and college funds and family vacations? She studied her reflection in the bathroom mirror, trying to see any physical changes. Her breasts were slightly fuller, though that could just be wishful thinking. Her waist looked the same, but at 8 weeks, it was too early for any real changes. Still, knowing what was growing inside her made everything different. She was no longer just Jada Baptiste, trauma surgeon and wife. She was Jada Baptiste, mother-to-be. She wrapped herself in her robe and headed downstairs, the positive test clutched in her hand like a treasure. Her heart was racing with excitement and nervousness. This moment would become part of their family lore, the story they would tell their child someday about the morning they found out they were going to be parents. She found Kieran in the kitchen, fully dressed in his favorite navy suit, standing by the marble island with a manila envelope in his hands. His expression was eerily calm, businesslike in a way that made her stomach drop. He looked like he was preparing for a difficult board meeting, not having breakfast with his wife. "You're up early," she said carefully, slipping the pregnancy test into her robe pocket. Something about his posture, his formal attire, the envelope in his hands, made her instinctively want to protect her news until she understood what was happening. "Board meeting? Jada." His tone was flat, emotionless, completely different from the warm, loving man who had held her the night before. "We need to talk." Something in his posture made her stomach clench with dread. This wasn't how she had imagined this morning going. He should be making coffee, asking about her plans for the day, kissing her good morning. Instead, he looked like a stranger wearing her husband's face. "Okay," she said slowly, moving closer to the island but maintaining some distance. Whatever was in that envelope, whatever had transformed her loving husband into this cold, formal man, she needed to understand it before she shared her news. He slid the envelope across the marble counter toward her. The paper made a soft scraping sound against the stone, a sound that somehow felt ominous in the morning quiet. "I want a divorce." The words hit her, stealing the breath from her lungs and making her grab the edge of the counter for support. This had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of horrible joke that she wasn't understanding. "I'm sorry?" "Divorce papers. I've already signed them." Her hands moved without her permission, opening the envelope with numb fingers. The legal language swam before her eyes, irreconcilable differences, division of assets, dissolution of marriage, but the signatures at the bottom were unmistakably real. His name, written in the confident script she had watched him use to sign contracts and birthday cards and their marriage certificate 3 years ago. The pregnancy test in her pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. How could this be happening? How could the man who had whispered, "I love you," just hours ago be serving her with divorce papers? How could the man whose life she had saved 2 days ago be throwing away their marriage? "I don't understand." Her voice sounded very far away, like it was coming from someone else. "2 days ago you were talking about hiring a COO. Yesterday you almost died and I saved your life. Last night you said nothing else mattered but us. What's changed?" "Nothing's changed. That's the problem." He straightened his tie with mechanical precision, like he was preparing for a business presentation instead of destroying his wife's world. "I've been thinking about this for months, Jada. We're not right for each other. We want different things." "What different things?" "We've never talked about wanting different things." Her voice was rising, panic and confusion making her sound shrill. "Kieran, what is this? What's really happening here? I want to focus on building my company without the distractions of a marriage that isn't working. You want a husband who comes home at 5 and asks about your day. We're incompatible." The cruelty of his clinical assessment left her breathless. This was the man who had built her a reading nook in their bedroom because he knew she liked to read before bed. This was the man who brought her coffee every morning before she left for the hospital. This was the man who had cried when she told him about losing her first patient. Incompatible? "Kieran, I love you. I love your ambition, your passion for your work. I've never asked you to change. Haven't you? The constant worry about my health, the suggestions about COOs and work-life balance? You want me to be someone I'm not. I want you to be alive." The words came out as a shout, her control finally snapping. "I want you to be healthy enough to enjoy the success you've worked so hard for. I want you to take care of yourself so we can have a future together." The pregnancy test felt like it was burning through her pocket. Should she tell him? Would it change anything? Or would he see it as another attempt to control him, another way to tie him down? "And I want to be free to build something that matters without feeling guilty every time I work late." He moved toward the foyer, clearly considering this conversation over. "My lawyer will handle everything. The prenup covers most of the details, but I'll be generous with the settlement." She followed him, desperation making her movements clumsy. The marble floors felt cold under her bare feet, and she realized she was still in her robe, still holding the envelope that contained the legal dissolution of their marriage. "Kieran, please. Can't we talk about this? Can't we try counseling? Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. We can work through it together." He paused at the elevator, his finger hovering over the call button. For just a moment, his mask slipped, and she saw something that looked like anguish in his eyes. Pain so deep it made her step toward him, made her want to comfort him even as he was destroying her. "I'm sorry, Jada. I know this seems sudden, but I've made up my mind. Is there someone else?" The question came out as a whisper because part of her desperately hoped there was. An affair would be devastating, but it would make sense. It would give her something to fight against, something to understand. "No, there's no one else." He stepped into the elevator when it arrived, and she could see his hand shaking as he pressed the button for the lobby. "Take care of yourself." The doors closed and he was gone. Jada stood in their foyer for a long time, divorce papers scattered at her feet where she had dropped them, her hand pressed against the pregnancy test hidden in her pocket. The man she had saved, the man she had loved with everything she had just walked away without explanation, without warning, without giving her a chance to fight for their marriage. She had never felt more alone in her life. The pregnancy test in her pocket remained a secret, but now it felt like a burden instead of a blessing. How could she tell him about the baby now? How could she use their child as a weapon to try to win him back? And more importantly, did she even want to fight for a man who could walk away so easily? She sank onto the marble floor, still in her silk robe, and finally allowed herself to fall apart completely. Great, heaving sobs that came from somewhere deep in her chest, the kind of crying that left her breathless and shaking. She cried for the future they had planned, for the family they would never have together, for the man she thought she knew who had turned out to be a stranger. Hours later, when she finally gathered the strength to pick up the scattered papers, she read through them carefully with the analytical mind that had gotten her through medical school. The settlement was indeed generous, more than generous. The penthouse would be hers, along with enough money to last several lifetimes. Kieran had even included provisions for her to keep her health insurance through his company, though she doubted he knew how ironic that was given what was growing inside her. The prenup they had signed 3 years ago protected most of his business assets, but everything else was split fairly. Too fairly, almost as if he was trying to assuage his guilt by giving her everything he could. 3 days later, sitting in her doctor's office, Jada stared at the ultrasound image that confirmed what she already knew. 8 weeks pregnant. Due in late June. The tiny blob on the screen that would become their daughter was completely unaware that her parents' marriage had just exploded. "Everything looks perfectly healthy," Dr. Mia said gently. Mia had been Jada's gynecologist for 5 years, had done her premarital blood work, and had been planning to be her pregnancy doctor when the time came. "Have you told the father yet?" Jada's laugh came out broken, bitter. "The father served me with divorce papers 3 days ago. He doesn't know, and at this point I don't think he'd care." Dr. Mia's expression softened with sympathy. She had seen Jada and Kieran together at medical conferences, had watched them dance at the hospital's charity gala just last month. They had seemed like the perfect couple, successful, attractive, deeply in love. "I'm so sorry. Do you have support? Family, friends?" "Some. I'll figure it out." She took the ultrasound photo with trembling fingers, staring at the grainy image of what would become her daughter. "I'm a surgeon. I'm used to handling crises." But as she sat in her car outside the medical building, staring at the ultrasound photo, she realized that all her medical training hadn't prepared her for this kind of heartbreak. She had saved countless lives, had made split-second decisions under unimaginable pressure, but she had no idea how to navigate the destruction of her marriage while carrying the child of the man who had abandoned her. For a brief moment, she considered calling him. The number was still in her phone, still marked as Husband Redheart, because she hadn't had the strength to change it yet. She could tell him about the baby, could force him to confront what he was walking away from. But even in her grief, she knew that wasn't fair, not to him, not to their child, and not to herself. If he wanted to leave, she wouldn't trap him with a pregnancy. If he didn't want to be married to her, she wouldn't use their baby as leverage. Their child deserved better than that, deserved to be wanted and celebrated, not used as a weapon in a marital war. The divorce was finalized with brutal efficiency. Kieran's lawyers were thorough and professional, handling everything through intermediaries so that Jada never had to see him again. True to his word, he had been generous, more than generous. The settlement was enough to buy a beautiful townhouse anywhere she wanted, establish her medical credentials in any country, and ensure she would never have to work again if she chose not to. The money felt like blood money, but her growing baby needed stability, and pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. Montreal in winter was a shock of cold that matched the numbness in Jada's chest. She had chosen the city almost at random, far enough from New York to feel like a different world, cosmopolitan enough to offer opportunities for a trauma surgeon, French enough to remind her that there were languages for pain she hadn't yet learned to speak. The decision to leave New York had been practical as much as emotional. Everywhere she looked in the city, she saw reminders of Kieran. The coffee shop where they had their first official date. The park where he had proposed on a snowy December evening. The restaurants where they had celebrated anniversaries and promotions, and ordinary Tuesday nights when they just wanted to be together. But more than that, she couldn't stand the possibility of running into him. New York's medical and business communities were smaller than people realized, and she knew it was only a matter of time before they would end up at the same conference or charity event. She couldn't bear the thought of seeing him across a crowded room, of having to make small talk while her belly grew with his child. Montreal offered anonymity and distance. The language barrier would give her an excuse to stay isolated while she figured out how to rebuild her life. And the city's excellent medical system meant she could continue practicing trauma surgery, which was the only thing keeping her sane. The townhouse in Westmount was beautiful in a way that felt almost mocking. 3 stories of restored Victorian architecture, with original hardwood floors and huge windows that let in the winter light. It was exactly the kind of place she and Kieran had talked about buying someday, when they were ready to start a family and needed more space than their Manhattan penthouse offered. Now she wandered through the empty rooms alone, planning where she would put the nursery, imagining raising a child in a house designed for a family she no longer had. Getting her medical credentials transferred to Canada was a bureaucratic nightmare that kept her busy and distracted for weeks. Mountains of paperwork, examinations to prove her competency, interviews with hospital administrators who wanted to understand why an accomplished American surgeon was suddenly interested in practicing medicine in Quebec. She let them assume what they wanted: messy divorce, custody issues, the usual expatriate drama. The truth was too complicated, too raw, too impossible to explain. How could she tell them that she had saved her husband's life only to have him destroy their marriage? How could she explain that she was carrying his child while he had no idea she was even pregnant? Montreal General Hospital was a world-class trauma center, and the emergency department was exactly the kind of controlled chaos that had always made Jada feel most alive. She threw herself into the work with desperate intensity, volunteering for extra shifts, taking the most complex cases, anything to exhaust herself enough that she could sleep without dreaming. Her colleagues were warm and welcoming in that particular way of Canadians. Dr. Philippe Dubois, the chief of emergency medicine, was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had trained at some of the best hospitals in Europe. He never asked directly about her personal circumstances, but he had a way of checking in on her that made it clear he understood she was running from something. "The work here is demanding," he told her during her first week. "But it is also healing, non? Sometimes we save others to save ourselves." Her French improved quickly out of necessity. Medical terminology translated well between languages, but the nuances of communicating with patients and families required fluency. She found herself thinking in French more and more, as if her brain was trying to rebuild itself in a language that didn't carry the weight of her memories. The pregnancy progressed normally, which felt like a small miracle given the stress she was under. Regular checkups with Dr. Marie-Claire Bouchard, an obstetrician who spoke perfect English but never made Jada feel like a foreigner, confirmed that the baby was growing well despite everything. "Babies are resilient," Dr. Bouchard assured her during a particularly emotional appointment in her second trimester. "Your little one knows she is loved, even if circumstances are complicated." The ultrasound at 20 weeks had confirmed what Jada had somehow known all along. They were having a daughter. Isabella, she decided, after her grandmother. Isabella Rose, because roses were Kieran's favorite flower, and even if he would never know his daughter, Jada wanted to carry some small part of their love into this new life. The other doctors and nurses at Montreal General gradually became her found family. Dr. Sarah Laval, our emergency medicine resident who reminded Jada of herself at that age, brilliant, driven, and slightly reckless with her own well-being. Mark Tremblay, a paramedic who had become a friend after bringing in several particularly complex cases that Jada had handled successfully. They invited her to drinks after difficult shifts, included her in their weekend plans, made sure she wasn't spending every evening alone in her beautiful, empty house. They were carefully incurious about her past, Canadian politeness preventing them from asking too many personal questions, but their kindness was exactly what she needed. "You're glowing," Sarah told her one evening in the hospital cafeteria, when Jada was about 6 months along. Pregnancy suits you. Thank you, Jada replied, unconsciously smoothing her scrubs over her growing belly. She had started showing early, probably because she was naturally thin, and the baby was becoming harder to hide under loose clothing. Will the father be joining you here in Montreal? Sarah asked carefully, clearly fishing for information but trying to be subtle about it. Jada took a sip of her decaf coffee, one of many pregnancy adjustments that reminded her daily of her new reality. No. He's not in the picture. Sarah nodded, understanding without needing details. In the medical field, complicated family situations were common enough that no one judged too harshly. Winter in Montreal was brutal in a way that felt appropriate to Jada's emotional state. The cold was clean and sharp, demanding attention and focus that left little room for wallowing. She learned to navigate the underground city during the worst storms, discovered the particular pleasure of coming inside from sub-zero temperatures to a warm, bright space. Her French landlady, Madame Rousseau, was a widow in her 70s who lived in the ground floor unit of the townhouse. She had a way of appearing with home-cooked meals whenever Jada looked particularly exhausted, and she never asked questions about why a pregnant American doctor was living alone in Montreal. "Less babies bring joy even in difficult times," she said one evening, delivering a pot of soup and staying to chat in her mixture of French and heavily accented English. "You will see. When she arrives, everything else becomes less important." As her due date approached, Jada tried not to think about what it would have been like to share this experience with Kieran. She tried not to imagine him feeling the baby kick, assembling a crib, arguing with her about names. She tried not to wonder if he ever thought about the life they had planned together, or if he had moved on completely. But sometimes, late at night when Isabella was particularly active, Jada would find herself talking to her belly about the father she would never know. "Your daddy is brilliant," she would whisper in the darkness of her bedroom. "He's changing the world with clean energy, making life better for people in places that have never had reliable electricity. He's stubborn and passionate and he works too hard, but he has the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known." She never talked about why Kieran wasn't there, never tried to explain the complicated circumstances of Isabella's conception. There would be time for those conversations later, when Isabella was old enough to understand. For now, it was enough to share the good memories, to make sure her daughter knew that she had been created from love, even if that love hadn't been strong enough to survive. By her third trimester, Jada had almost convinced herself she was better off without him. Almost. She had built a life in Montreal that was full and meaningful. She had colleagues who respected her, friends who cared about her, a beautiful home where she was planning to raise her daughter. She had everything she needed to be happy. But late at night, when the baby was quiet and the house was still, she sometimes found herself staring at her phone, scrolling through old photos of her and Kieran together. She never called, never texted, never allowed herself to reach out and disrupt whatever new life he was building without her. But she kept the photos, kept the contact information, kept a small part of her heart open to the possibility that someday, somehow, things might be different. Zara had been Jada's roommate at Johns Hopkins, her maid of honor, and one of the few people who understood both her brilliance and her capacity for fierce, protective love. They had stayed close after medical school, even as their careers took them in different directions. Jada into trauma surgery, Zara into medical consulting for pharmaceutical companies. When Zara appeared at Jada's door on a snowy February evening, 8 months pregnant and clearly exhausted, Jada's first thought was that something terrible had happened. Zara looked like she had been crying, her usually perfect hair disheveled, her expensive coat wrinkled from travel. "Zara? What are you doing here? Is everything okay? Can I come in? It's about Kieran." The name settled into the quiet of her Montreal townhouse like a stone dropping into still water, sending ripples through the carefully constructed piece she had built over the past 8 months. She had been so careful, so disciplined about not thinking about him, not wondering, not hoping. 8 months of silence hadn't prepared her for the sound of his name in her friend's voice. "I don't want to hear about him." The words came out sharper than she intended, but she couldn't help it. Just hearing his name was enough to make her chest tight with old pain. "Jada, please. I flew here from New York because there are things you need to know. Things that change everything." Against her better judgment, she let Zara in, helped her out of her snow-covered coat, and led her to the living room where a fire was crackling in the fireplace. The room was warm and cozy, decorated with the kind of comfort-focused furniture that Jada had never bothered with in New York but had found essential in Montreal. She made tea with hands that shook only slightly, muscle memory from months of practice at controlling her emotions. Earl Grey with honey, The way Zara had always liked it during their late-night study sessions in medical school. She settled heavily onto her couch. Everything was more difficult now that she was 8 months pregnant, while her friend paced the living room with nervous energy. "You look incredible," Zara said finally, her eyes taking in Jada's obvious pregnancy with a mixture of joy and concern. "Pregnancy suits you. You're glowing." "Thank you. Now tell me why you're here, because if this is some misguided attempt to get me to forgive him, or if he sent you to—" "He didn't send me. He doesn't even know I'm here." Zara finally sat down, perching on the edge of the armchair like she might need to flee at any moment. "Jada, he's sick. Really sick. I found out by accident. Insurance paperwork got mixed up with some consulting work I'm doing for his company. I saw medical reports that weren't meant for me." The room tilted. Her teacup slipped from numb fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor in a spray of porcelain and hot liquid. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the sudden silence. "What kind of sick?" "Leukemia. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. He was diagnosed the day after his collapse, the day you saved his life." The words didn't make sense at first. Jada's medical mind tried to process the information while her heart rejected it entirely. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia was aggressive, dangerous, especially in adults. The survival rates were good if caught early, but the treatment was brutal. "That's impossible. If he had cancer, he would have told me." "He wouldn't have." "Wouldn't he?" Zara's voice was gentle but implacable. "Think about it, Jada. The man I've been working with for the past few months is not the same person you married. He's been going through chemotherapy alone. Completely alone." "Chemotherapy." She said the word like it was foreign, incomprehensible. "How long?" 8 months. He started treatment a week after your divorce was finalized." 8 months. Her entire pregnancy, he had been fighting for his life while she had been carrying their child in another country, hating him for abandoning her. While she had been learning French and building a new career and planning to raise their daughter alone, he had been sitting in treatment centers, poison flowing through his veins, fighting a disease that could have killed him. "I don't understand. Why wouldn't he tell me? Why would he push me away when he needed me most?" "Because he's an idiot." Zara's voice was fierce with anger. "Because he convinced himself that leaving you was some kind of noble sacrifice. He didn't want you to watch him die." The full horror of the situation began to sink in. The timing made perfect sense now. The stress that had triggered his cardiac episode, the sudden divorce, the clinical way he had ended their marriage. He had been facing his own mortality and had decided to protect her from it. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question, couldn't voice the fear that was clawing at her chest. "He's in remission. Has been for 3 months. The doctors say his prognosis is excellent." Zara reached over and took her hands, gripping them tightly. "But Jada, the treatment was hell. I've seen him at board meetings, seen what it did to him. He lost 40 pounds. His hair fell out. There were days when he could barely stand up, but he kept working, kept running the company like nothing was wrong." Tears were streaming down Jada's face now, 8 months of carefully suppressed emotion finally breaking free. She thought about all the nights she had lain awake wondering why he had stopped loving her, all the time she had replayed their last conversation looking for clues about what she had done wrong. "Jada, there's something else." Zara's voice was very quiet now. "He doesn't know about the baby." The statement hung in the air like an accusation. All these months she had been angry at him for abandoning their child. But he had never known there was a child to abandon. "I know you had your reasons for not telling him," Zara continued. "And maybe they were good reasons. But he thinks you moved on. He thinks you're happy without him. He thinks you found someone else and are building a life that doesn't include him." "How could I tell him?" The words came out as a cry. "He served me with divorce papers, Zara. He looked me in the eye and told me we were incompatible, that I was a distraction from his work. How was I supposed to use a pregnancy to try to win him back?" "You weren't supposed to use it to win him back. You were supposed to tell him because he's the father of your child." Jada looked down at her belly, where their daughter was currently practicing what felt like martial arts against her ribs. Isabella had been active lately, as if she could sense her mother's emotional turmoil. 8 months of rage and heartbreak suddenly transformed into something else entirely, grief for the fear he must have felt, guilt for not somehow knowing he needed her, and underneath it all, a fierce, protective love that had never really gone away. "What am I supposed to do now?" she whispered. "Show up 8 months pregnant and say, 'Surprise, you're going to be a father, and by the way, sorry you had to fight cancer alone?'" "I don't know," Zara admitted. "I just know that I couldn't live with myself if I didn't tell you the truth. He's the father of your child, Jada. And whatever mistakes he made, whatever misguided decisions he made them because he loves you. He's been carrying divorce papers that he never wanted to sign, going through cancer treatment without the one person who could have helped him through it. I have to go back. The words came out before Jada could stop them, before she could think about logistics or practicalities or the fact that she was 8 months pregnant. Jada, you're 8 months pregnant. You shouldn't be flying, especially not in your emotional state. I don't care. She struggled to her feet, her mind already racing ahead to flights and logistics and what she would say when she saw him. I have to see him. I have to tell him about Isabella. What if he doesn't want to see you? What if he still thinks leaving you was the right choice? What if he's moved on? Jada looked at her friend, then down at her belly where Kieran's daughter was growing strong and healthy. For 8 months she had been building a life without him, convincing herself that she was better off alone. But the truth was she had never stopped loving him. She had never stopped missing him. She had never stopped hoping that somehow, someday they would find their way back to each other. Then I'll convince him otherwise. She placed both hands on her belly, feeling Isabella respond with a strong kick. We'll convince him otherwise. The flight from Montreal to New York felt endless. Jada shifted uncomfortably in her first-class seat, one of the few advantages of Kieran's generous divorce settlement, while their daughter seemed determined to use her bladder as a trampoline. Every few minutes she had to resist the urge to call him, to give him warning that his world was about to change forever. No. This conversation needed to happen face to face. After 8 months of silence, after everything they had both been through, she owed him that much. The business-class cabin was nearly empty for the late afternoon flight, and the flight attendant had been kind enough to bring her extra pillows and blankets without being asked. Jada tried to sleep, but her mind was racing with everything Zara had told her, everything she now understood about the last 8 months. Kieran had been fighting for his life while she had been building a new one. He had been enduring chemotherapy while she had been learning to speak French. He had been losing weight and hair and strength while she had been growing round with his child. The parallel timelines felt like some kind of cosmic joke. She thought about the timing of his diagnosis. The day after his collapse, while she had been planning to tell him about their pregnancy, Dr. Webb had been delivering news that would change everything. No wonder he had seemed different that morning in the kitchen. No wonder he had been so clinical, so removed. He had been preparing for the most difficult conversation of his life. The plane hit turbulence somewhere over upstate New York, and Jada felt Isabella respond with a series of sharp kicks. Easy, sweetheart, she whispered, rubbing her belly. We're going to see your daddy. We're going to meet the man I've been telling you about all these months. What would she say to him? How do you start a conversation with someone who has been through hell while you've been living a completely different life? How do you explain 8 months of silence, 8 months of carrying his child while he fought cancer alone? She had practiced the words on the plane, but nothing sounded right. I'm pregnant with your daughter seemed too blunt. We need to talk seemed too vague. I never stopped loving you seemed too desperate, even if it was true. The truth was she had no idea how he would react to seeing her. For all she knew, he had moved on completely. Maybe the cancer had given him perspective, made him realize that cutting ties with her had been the right choice. Maybe he was relieved to be free of their marriage, free to focus on his health and his work without the complications of a relationship. But she had to try. Their daughter deserved a father, and Kieran deserved to know that he was going to be one. Whatever had happened between them, whatever pain and misunderstanding had driven them apart, they owed it to Isabella to at least try to find a way forward. The Ashworth building on Madison Avenue looked smaller than she remembered, its sleek glass facade reflecting the late February sky like a mirror. She had only been here a handful of times during their marriage. Kieran had always been protective of the boundary between work and home, but the security guard recognized her immediately. Mrs. Ashworth. I mean Dr. Baptiste. James, the elderly security guard, flushed with embarrassment at his mistake. His eyes widened as they took in her obvious pregnancy. I'm sorry, I didn't know you were. It's okay, James. Is he in? Yes, ma'am. Top floor as always. Should I call up and let him know you're here? No. I'd like to surprise him. James looked uncertain, clearly aware that divorced couples didn't usually show up unannounced at each other's workplaces, especially when one of them was visibly pregnant. But he had always liked Jada, had appreciated the way she remembered his grandchildren's names and asked about his wife's health. Of course, ma'am. You know the way. The elevator ride to the 40th floor felt like ascending toward Judgment Day. She caught her reflection in the polished doors, 8 months pregnant, bundled in a wool coat that barely closed over her belly, her face pale with exhaustion and determination. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman who had traveled across international borders to fight for her family. Her hands were shaking as the elevator climbed, numbers lighting up in sequence. 25, 30, 35, 40. Each floor brought her closer to a conversation that would change everything one way or another. By the time those doors opened, she would be committed to a path that she couldn't undo. The executive floor was exactly as she remembered. Minimalist decor, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered stunning views of Manhattan, the quiet hum of wealth and power. Fresh flowers on every surface, original artwork on the walls, the kind of understated luxury that spoke of success and good taste. Kieran's assistant, Patricia, looked up from her desk with undisguised shock. Patricia had always been professional but warm during Jada's previous visits, and she had clearly not been prepared for this particular surprise. Dr. Baptiste. We weren't expecting. Her eyes darted from Jada's face to her belly and back again, clearly struggling to process what she was seeing. Is he in his office? Yes, but he's in a video conference with the Singapore team and I really should. Patricia was already reaching for her phone, clearly intending to warn Kieran that his pregnant ex-wife was about to walk into his office unannounced. Jada was already walking past her, heels clicking against marble, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She had come too far to be stopped by protocol now. Dr. Baptiste, please, if you could just wait. But Jada was already at his door. She paused for just a moment, gathering her courage, listening to the sound of his voice through the heavy wood. He was speaking animatedly about market penetration in Southeast Asia, his voice carrying the same passionate energy that had first attracted her to him at that charity gala years ago. She pushed the door open without knocking. Kieran was standing at the windows with his back to the door, talking animatedly to someone on his laptop screen. He looked thinner than she remembered, his shoulders sharp beneath his tailored suit, but he was alive. He was standing and talking and alive, and for a moment that was all that mattered. I'm sorry, gentlemen, he was saying to the screen, but something's come up. Patricia, can you reschedule this for? He turned around and froze. For a moment that lasted an eternity, they simply stared at each other across the expanse of his office. She watched his gaze travel from her face to her belly, his expression shifting through shock, confusion, disbelief, and something that might have been wonder. His face had changed. He was thinner, as Zara had said, but it was more than that. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a weariness that spoke of months of struggle. His hair, which had always been thick and dark, was shorter now, still growing back from what had obviously been complete loss. But his eyes were the same. The same deep brown that had captured her heart, the same intelligence and intensity that had made her fall in love with him. And right now, those eyes were wide with shock and something that looked like hope. I'll call you back, he said to the laptop without taking his eyes off her, and closed it with a sharp click. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. She had rehearsed this moment on the plane, planned exactly what she would say, but now that she was here, facing him, all her careful words had fled. You look. He began, then stopped, his voice hoarse with shock. Pregnant? She supplied, trying to keep her voice steady. 8 months pregnant, to be exact. His face had gone very pale, making the new lines around his eyes more pronounced. He gripped the edge of his desk as if he needed the support to stay standing. Is it? Yours? Yes. He sank into his desk chair as if his legs had stopped working, one hand pressed to his mouth, his eyes never leaving her belly. She could see him trying to do the math, trying to figure out trying to understand how this was possible. But when we were married, you never said. Because I didn't get the chance. Her voice was steadier than she felt, strengthened by 8 months of anger that was finally finding its target. I found out 3 days after you served me with divorce papers. 3 days after you walked out of our marriage without explanation. God. The word was barely a whisper. Jada, I'm so sorry. If I had known. You would have what? Stayed out of pity? The question came out sharper than she intended, but she needed to know. She needed to understand what this meant to him. No. The sharpness in his voice surprised them both. I would have stayed because I love you. Because I've loved you every day since I left, and leaving you was the hardest thing I've ever done. The words hung in the air between them, raw and honest and full of pain. 8 months of silence, 8 months of wondering, 8 months of building separate lives, and he still loved her. Then why? The question came out as a cry, 8 months of suppressed anguish finally finding voice. Why did you throw away our marriage? Why did you make me believe you didn't want me anymore? He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped in his lap, his eyes fixed on some point beyond her shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was raw with pain and exhaustion and months of carrying a terrible secret alone. Because I was dying. Or I thought I was. The day after you saved my life, Dr. Webb told me I had acute lymphoblastic leukemia. Even with treatment, there were no guarantees. I couldn't bear the thought of you watching me waste away. For a moment, the weight of everything else fell away, and there was just that pure joy of sharing the news she had been carrying alone for 8 months. She could see him imagining it, teaching a little girl to ride a bike, reading bedtime stories, walking her down the aisle someday. But then reality crashed back in, and his face crumpled with guilt and regret. Kieran. She moved closer to his desk, close enough to see the way his hands trembled, the way his eyes were bright with unshed tears. I made a vow to you 3 years ago. For better or worse, in sickness and in health. Did you think those were just pretty words? I thought. I was trying to protect you. From what? From loving you? From fighting beside you? From being there when you needed me most? Her voice cracked with emotion, 8 months of pain finally finding its voice. You took that choice away from me. You took away my right to be your wife when you needed me most. I know, and I'm sorry. But Jada, you don't understand what the treatment was like. The chemo, the hospitals, the uncertainty. Was. She seized on the past tense like a lifeline, the medical professional in her latching onto the most important piece of information. He met her eyes for the first time since she had walked into the room. I've been in remission for 3 months. Full remission. The doctors say my chances are excellent. Relief crashed over her so powerfully she had to grab the edge of his desk for support. Her knees nearly buckled, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. He was okay. He was really okay. The man she loved, the father of her child, was going to live. You're okay. You're really okay. I'm okay. But Jada? He stood slowly, moving around the desk toward her but stopping just out of reach, as if he didn't have the right to touch her anymore. Even if I had told you the truth from the beginning, even if we had faced it together, I destroyed us. I destroyed everything we had. She looked at him, really looked at him, taking in the shadows under his eyes, the way his clothes hung slightly loose on his frame, the careful distance he maintained even now. He was afraid, she realized. Afraid to hope, afraid to reach for something he believed he had lost forever. The months of treatment had clearly been brutal. She could see it in the way he held himself, in the new lines on his face, in the careful way he moved. But underneath the physical changes he was still Kieran. Still the man who had fallen in love with her passion for saving lives, still the man who wanted to change the world through clean energy. Do you love me? She asked simply. More than my own life. Do you want this baby? Do you want this baby? Our daughter? With everything I am. She closed the distance between them and took his hands in hers. They were warm, steady, alive, thinner than she remembered, marked with small scars that she assumed were from 4 lines and medical procedures, but they were his hands. The hands that had held her, loved her, built a company that was changing the world. Then nothing's destroyed. Nothing that can't be rebuilt. She squeezed his fingers, feeling the familiar callus on his ring finger where his wedding band used to rest. We said for better or worse, remember? Well, this was our worse. But if you want it, if you really want it, we can find our way to better. He stared down at their joined hands and she could see the war being fought behind his eyes. Hope against fear, love against guilt, the future against the past. 8 months of believing he had made the right choice, 8 months of convincing himself that she was better off without him, 8 months of fighting cancer alone because he thought it was noble. I don't deserve another chance. That's not your choice to make. It's mine. She lifted one of his hands and placed it gently on her belly, where their daughter immediately responded with a strong kick. And I choose you, Kieran. I choose us. I choose our family. When he felt their daughter move beneath his palm, the last of his defenses crumbled. His face transformed with wonder and awe, tears streaming down his cheeks as he felt his child move for the first time. 8 months of pregnancy, 8 months of growth and development that he had missed because of his own misguided attempt at heroism. She's real, he whispered, his voice filled with amazement. She's really real. She's been real this whole time, Jada said softly. She's been growing and kicking and hiccuping and making me crave the strangest foods. She gets active every night around 10 o'clock, which is when you used to come to bed. I think she has your schedule already. He laughed through his tears, a sound of pure joy that she hadn't heard in so long it made her own eyes fill. What have you been calling her? Isabella. Isabella Rose. She watched his face carefully, hoping he would understand the significance. Isabella after my grandmother, Rose because. She trailed off, suddenly uncertain. Because roses are my favorite flower, he finished, his voice thick with emotion. You remembered. I remember everything about you, Kieran. I remember how you take your coffee, how you hum when you're concentrating, how you always check your phone exactly 3 times before you fall asleep. I remember that you cry at dog movies and that you can't sleep without the window cracked open. I remember all of it because I never stopped loving you. He looked up at her with wonder and gratitude and the beginning of forgiveness, for her, for himself, for the cruel trick of timing that had nearly cost them everything. I missed so much, he whispered, his voice breaking. I missed your entire pregnancy. I missed watching her grow. I missed being there when you needed me. Then don't miss any more. She covered his hand with both of hers, holding it against their daughter's movements. Be here now. Be here for the rest of it. He kissed her then, soft and desperate and full of 8 months of longing. She tasted tears, hers, she couldn't tell the difference anymore, and something that might have been forgiveness. When they broke apart, she could see the man she had married in his eyes again, the man who had been buried under months of fear and treatment and misguided nobility. I love you, he whispered against her lips. I love you both so much. Then come home, she said simply. Come home and help me get ready for our daughter. They didn't return to the penthouse that day. Instead, Kieran took her to a small cafe near the hospital where he had undergone treatment, a place that had become his refuge during the darkest months of his life. I used to sit in that corner booth, he told her, pointing to a table by the window. The cafe was warm and cozy, filled with the scent of fresh coffee and pastries, the kind of place that felt like a sanctuary from the chaos of the city. I'd watch people walking by with their families, with their children, and I'd imagine what our daughter might look like. Whether she'd have your stubborn streak or your brilliant mind. Definitely the stubborn streak, Jada said, rubbing her belly as their daughter performed what felt like acrobatics. She's been keeping me up at night for weeks. And she has very strong opinions about what I eat. The waitress, a kind woman in her 50s who clearly recognized Kieran, brought them tea without being asked. The usual spot, Dr. Ashworth? She asked gently, and Jada realized that this place had been more than just a cafe for him. It had been a lifeline during treatment. They talked for hours, slowly and carefully peeling back 8 months of silence and misunderstanding. He told her about the diagnosis, about sitting in Dr. Webb's office while the world shifted on its axis. About the terrifying statistics, the treatment options, the impossible choice between fighting for his life and protecting the woman he loved. The first thing I thought when he told me was, I can't let Jada go through this, Kieran said, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup like he needed the warmth. The second thing was, she's going to want to fight with me and I can't ask her to do that. You should have asked me, Jada said quietly. You should have let me make that choice. I know that now. But in that moment all I could think about was watching you watch me die. All I could imagine was you spending your energy taking care of me instead of living your life, building your career, being happy. He told her about the chemo treatments he had endured alone, sitting in sterile rooms while poison flowed through his veins, fighting nausea and exhaustion and the constant fear that it might not work. About the nights he had almost called her, his finger hovering over her contact information, desperately wanting to hear her voice but convinced that reaching out would be selfish. I followed your career, he admitted. I read every paper you published, watched the news coverage when you moved to Montreal. I was so proud of you for building a new life, for being strong enough to move on. She told him about Montreal, about building a new existence while carrying his child, about the way she had trained herself not to think his name, about the colleagues who had become her chosen family, about the lonely nights when Isabella was active and she wished desperately that he was there to feel their daughter kick. I kept our wedding ring, she admitted, showing him the simple platinum band she had moved to her right hand. I told myself it was just habit, but I kept mine too. He pulled a chain from beneath his shirt and there it was, his wedding ring worn close to his heart for 8 months. I couldn't bear to take it off completely. The sight of their rings, kept safe despite everything that had happened between them, felt like a sign. They had both been holding on to hope, even when hope seemed impossible. As the afternoon faded into evening, they made plans. Not grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but small, practical steps toward rebuilding what they had nearly lost. Doctor's appointments so he could be part of the rest of her pregnancy. Couples counseling to work through the trauma of their separation. A nursery to prepare in whatever home they chose to share. I want to be there, he said as they walked slowly toward his building, her hand tucked into his arm. For the birth, for midnight feedings, for everything. If you'll let me. Try and stop me. She squeezed his hand, feeling the wedding ring on the chain around his neck press against her arm. But Kieran? No more noble sacrifices. No more making decisions for both of us. We're in this together now, whatever comes. Together, he agreed and sealed the promise with a kiss. The next few weeks were a delicate dance of rebuilding trust while preparing for their daughter's arrival. Kieran insisted on coming to Montreal to help her pack and close up the life she had built there. He was gentle with her colleagues, grateful to the people who had taken care of her when he couldn't, and Jada could see him filing away their names and stories to remember later. "Thank you," he told Dr. Dubois on their last day at Montreal General. "Thank you for taking care of her when I couldn't." "She took care of herself," Dr. Dubois replied in his accented English. "But we were honored to work with her. You are a lucky man to have such a woman." "I know," Kieran said, his arm around Jada's shoulders. "I'm very lucky." They decided to start fresh in a new place, neither the Montreal townhouse nor the Manhattan penthouse. Instead, they found a beautiful house in Westchester, close enough to the city for work but far enough away to feel like a sanctuary. It had a garden where children could play, a home office where Kieran could work when he needed to, and most importantly, space for the family they were building. The nursery became their first joint project, a symbol of the future they were choosing to build together. Soft yellow walls because they both loved the sunshine, a rocking chair by the window where they could feed Isabella and tell her stories, shelves waiting for books they would read together. "She's going to be so loved," Jada said one evening, standing in the doorway of the completed nursery. At 36 weeks pregnant, she was enormous and uncomfortable, but happier than she had been in months. "She already is," Kieran replied, his hands on her belly. "She's the most loved baby in the world." Isabella Rose Ashworth arrived 6 weeks later on a perfect April morning, screaming her displeasure at the world with impressive volume. The labor had been long and difficult, 18 hours that tested every ounce of strength Jada had, but Kieran had been there for every moment, holding her hand, coaching her breathing, whispering encouragement even when she threatened to murder him if he told her to breathe one more time. "She's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as the doctor placed their daughter on Jada's chest. "She's absolutely perfect." Isabella had her father's dark hair and her mother's determined chin, and from the moment Kieran held her in his arms, tears streaming down his face, Jada knew their family was complete. The sight of him cradling their daughter, this man who had fought cancer and won, who had nearly thrown away everything good in his life out of misguided love, was almost too beautiful to bear. "Just like her daddy," Jada said softly, watching her husband, cradle their daughter with infinite tenderness. "She's strong," Kieran marveled as Isabella gripped his finger with surprising force. "Look at that grip. She's going to be a fighter like her mother." "And stubborn like her father," Jada added, exhausted but euphoric. After everything they had been through, after the separation and the secrets and the months of building separate lives, here they were, a family. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the particular chaos that comes with first-time parenthood. Isabella was indeed strong-willed, with very definite opinions about when she wanted to sleep, never, and what she wanted to eat, everything immediately. But Kieran threw himself into fatherhood with the same passion he brought to everything else in his life. He learned to change diapers with scientific precision, mastered the art of the 3 a.m. feeding, and could calm Isabella's crying better than anyone except Jada. Watching him with their daughter was like watching him discover a part of himself he hadn't known existed. "I never knew," he told Jada one night, as they took turns walking Isabella around the nursery during a particularly difficult sleep regression. "I never knew I could love someone this much." "Now you know why I was so angry," Jada replied, shifting their daughter to her other shoulder. "This is what you almost missed. This is what you almost threw away. The years that followed weren't perfect. No real love story ever is. They had to rebuild trust slowly, learning to communicate fears instead of making assumptions about what was best for each other. Kieran had to face the guilt of his choices and learn to accept help instead of trying to protect everyone around him. Jada had to forgive not just him, but herself for all the time they had lost. Kieran's cancer required ongoing monitoring, quarterly blood tests, annual scans, the constant low-level anxiety that came with being a cancer survivor. But each clean result was a celebration, each milestone a victory. When Isabella turned 1, when she took her first steps, when she said her first word, which was appropriately Dada, they felt like gifts that might not have been possible. But they did it together, through sleepless nights with a colicky baby, through Kieran's periodic cancer screenings that made them both hold their breath, through the ordinary challenges of building a life worth living. 2 years later, Marcus James Ashworth joined their family, A chubby, cheerful baby who adored his big sister and seemed determined to keep everyone entertained with his infectious giggles. Isabella took to being a big sister with the same determination she brought to everything else, helping with feedings and diaper changes and announcing to anyone who would listen that baby Marcus was hers. 2 kids, Kieran said one evening, watching Isabella help him give Marcus a bottle while Jada dozed on the couch nearby. Think we can handle it? I think we can handle anything, Isabella replied seriously, her 4-year-old wisdom making him smile. Mama says we're a team. That's right, sweetheart. We're a team. The company thrived under the management team they had built, allowing Kieran to step back from day-to-day operations and focus on the big-picture vision that had always been his strength. Ashworth Renewable Energy became a model for how businesses could grow while staying true to their values, and Kieran's story of surviving cancer while building a global company became an inspiration to other entrepreneurs facing their own challenges. Jada returned to medicine part-time, consulting on trauma cases while maintaining a schedule that allowed her to be present for her children. She found that her experience as a mother had made her an even better doctor, more attuned to the families who waited in hospital corridors, more understanding of what it meant to love someone so much that their pain became your own. They made sure to tell their children the story of how they almost lost each other, age-appropriately but honestly. Isabella and Marcus grew up understanding that love was something you had to fight for, that families were built not just on good times but on working through the difficult ones together. Daddy was sick when I was in Mommy's tummy, Isabella would tell Marcus when he was old enough to understand. But he got better and then we all lived happily ever after. It wasn't quite that simple, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. 5 years after that terrible morning in their kitchen, watching Kieran teach Isabella to ride her bike in Central Park while Marcus toddled after them on unsteady legs, Jada marveled at how close they had come to losing everything. One man's misguided attempt at heroism had nearly cost them their family, their future, their chance at the kind of love that grows stronger through trial. Mama, look! Isabella called, pedaling furiously toward them, her face bright with triumph. I'm flying. Jada caught Kieran's eye over their daughter's head and saw her own wonder reflected there. They had created these beautiful children, this imperfect but resilient love, this second chance that felt more precious than gold because they knew how easily it could have been lost. Yes, baby, she called back to Isabella. You're absolutely flying. And watching her daughter soar down the path with fearless joy, Jada thought about how love, like courage, sometimes meant holding on when everything inside you wanted to let go. She and Kieran had both learned that lesson the hard way. But they had learned it together and that made all the difference. The park was full of families that day, parents pushing strollers, children playing on swings, couples walking hand in hand while their dogs chased tennis balls. It was the kind of scene that Kieran had watched from that cafe window during his chemotherapy, imagining a future that had seemed impossible then. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if I hadn't gone to Montreal? Jada asked, settling onto a bench while they watched their children play. If Zara hadn't found those medical records? Every day, Kieran admitted, his arm around her shoulders. But I try not to think about it too much. We can't change the past and we have everything we wanted now. Do we? She asked, genuinely curious. Is this what you imagined when you were sitting in that cafe watching other families? This is better, he said simply. Because it's real. Because we earned it. Because we know how precious it is. Marcus had reached the age where he wanted to do everything his big sister did, including ride a bike that was far too big for him. Kieran jogged over to help him onto Isabella's bike, holding the back of the seat while Marcus gripped the handlebars with determination that reminded Jada of herself at that age. I think he's going to be a doctor, Kieran called back to her. He has your stubborn streak and your need to fix everything. And Isabella? Isabella's going to change the world. I can see it in her eyes. They were probably both right. Isabella had her father's passion for justice and her mother's determination to help people. Marcus had an engineer's mind and a healer's heart. Whatever they chose to do with their lives, they would do it knowing they were loved unconditionally, knowing their parents had fought for their family and won. As the afternoon wore on and they gathered their tired children for the walk home, Jada reflected on the journey that had brought them here. The near-death experience that had started everything. The devastating divorce that had torn them apart. The months of separation and silence. The revelation that had changed everything. The slow, careful work of rebuilding trust and love. I've been thinking, Kieran said as they walked home, Isabella riding her bike ahead of them while Marcus dozed in his stroller. About what we tell the kids when they're older. About what they should know about love and marriage and fighting for what matters. What would you tell them? That love isn't a feeling that happens to you. It's a choice you make every day. That the strongest relationships aren't the ones that never face problems, they're the ones that face problems together and come out stronger on the other side. And that sometimes the people we love make decisions that seem impossible to understand, but that doesn't mean they don't love us, Jada added. It just means they're human and humans make mistakes. Even big ones, Kieran agreed. Even mistakes that almost destroy everything. But love finds a way, Jada said. If you're brave enough to fight for it. That evening, after the children were asleep and they were finally alone together, Jada and Kieran sat in their garden with glasses of wine, watching the stars come out over Westchester. It was the kind of peaceful moment that had seemed impossible during those dark months when their marriage was falling apart. Do you think we would have made it? Jada asked suddenly. If you had told me about the cancer from the beginning? Kieran was quiet for a long moment, considering the question seriously. I think it would have been harder, he said finally. The treatment was brutal, Jada. Watching someone you love go through that. I'm not sure our marriage would have survived the stress. But we would have faced it together. Yes. And maybe that would have made all the difference. Maybe going through it together would have made us stronger from the beginning, instead of having to rebuild after everything fell apart. We'll never know, Jada said. But I know this, I'm grateful for the journey we had, even the painful parts. Because it taught us things about love and forgiveness and fighting for what matters that we might never have learned otherwise. I'm grateful you came back, Kieran said simply. I'm grateful you were brave enough to fight for us when I was too scared to fight for myself. I'm grateful Isabella gave me a reason to be brave, Jada replied. I might not have done it for just me, but I couldn't let her grow up without knowing her father. They sat in comfortable silence, hands intertwined, watching the stars and thinking about the path that had brought them here. Two successful, driven people who had nearly lost everything because they forgot that the most important things in life couldn't be achieved alone. Some stories begin with love at first sight. Others begin with love lost and found again. But the best stories, the ones worth telling and retelling, begin with love that chooses to fight for itself, again and again, until what seemed impossible becomes inevitable as breathing. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that real love is worth fighting for, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button to let me know this story moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that second chances are real, that love can survive even the worst mistakes, and that sometimes the people we love make choices we don't understand, but that doesn't mean they don't love us. What's the greatest sacrifice you'd make for love? What's the hardest fight you've ever had for someone you care about? Tell me in the comments below. Your story might be the next one I share. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the courage to save someone's life, continue with the heartbreak of watching them walk away, and end with the wisdom to understand that love is always worth fighting for. I'll see you in the next story.